that's Good evening. We better get started. We held the start for a while because we have an awful lot of bits of paper being filled out outside. So we've now got those. So, welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thanks very much. My name is Councillor Westgalt and I chair this committee, and I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated on my left is Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Deputy Mayor, a missing councillor. We have apologies, we'll come back to those in a moment. Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Mayor, Councillor Di Gillies. On my right, geographically speaking, we have Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Addis, and Councillor Susan Bigger. Welcome. I acknowledge our Coordinator Governance, Ms Kirsten Ritchie, on my left, and Director Urban Living, Mr Scott Walker, on my right. There are a number of other officers here tonight, and we'll introduce them as they present items. Okay, moving to general introductions. The Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting is being live streamed on Council's YouTube to enable public viewing as we move forward. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available again on the Council YouTube as soon as practicable after the meeting. The primary purpose of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee is to deal with issues under the Planning and Environment Act and the Building Act. This committee actually has delegated authority to make decisions on behalf of Council. For those of you presenting this evening, and I understand there's quite a few of you presenting, when we come to the agenda item, it will be introduced by one of our officers. And when I call your name one by one, please come forward. If you're making a submission, please present your viewpoints clearly and concisely on why you support or oppose the planning application. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said, and keep your submission focused on relevant issues and points not previously raised, if you wouldn't mind. And that's particularly important given the numbers who are presenting tonight. If you are opposed to the planning application, it would appreciate if you tell the committee why you disagree and suggest alternative approaches that would satisfy your concerns. Please focus on your concerns rather than matters of history or details raised in the officer's report. There's a strict limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, that's including councillors, and whilst I as chair can vary those times, it is seldom done. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will ring a bell, which indicates that you have 30 seconds to complete your presentation. For those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take this opportunity to remind you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. I just add another item tonight. I understand, and I'd like to say, if you're having trouble in the gallery behind, let me know, stick your hand up, but we have on previous nights had trouble hearing, I understand, from the gallery. So when you get an opportunity to come forward, make sure you speak clearly into the speaker or the microphone, and that applies to councillors and officers, I'm told, as well. Thank you. So we move to apologies. Ms Ritchie, are there any apologies this evening?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, there are 2 apologies, Councillor Stavro and Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I'll now move to the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting held on the 19th of February this year? Gone. It's back again. Councillor Gillies.
So moved, thanks, Chair.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sinfield.
Happy to second.
Thank you both. All of those in support, please raise your hand. I declare that motion carried. We'll move on now to conflicts of interest. Councillors and council officers, are there any conflicts of interest that you wish to foreshadow for matters in tonight's agenda? None? Thank you. We will move on to the body of the meeting. We'll move to presentation of officers' reports, starting with 3.1, which is 756 to 758 Glenferrie Road, Hawthorn, the planning application for packaged liquor or bottle shop, PP 230503. Tonight, the officers Elizabeth Banjar, Senior Strategic Planner, and Joel Elburn, Manager Urban Planning, will present the report on behalf of the officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I present UPDC item number 3.1 relating to planning permit application PP 230503 of 756 to 758 Glenferrie Road in Hawthorn. It is proposed that the existing commercial building be partially demolished and altered and extended, and that a packaged liquor licence be introduced to the land associated with the new bottle shop. The site is located in the Hawthorn Glenferrie Road Major Activity Centre and is also zoned within the Commercial 1 zone. It is affected by the Design and Development Overlay, Parking Overlay, Heritage Overlay, and the Special Building Overlay. 3 parking spaces will be provided on the site, and a total of 39 objections were received to the application. The proposed land use and development scale is appropriate to the site's location in the Commercial 1 zone and within the Hawthorn Glenferrie Road Major Activity Centre. The provision of packaged liquor, which will be running no later than 9 p.m. on any day, is considered to be acceptable on a main road within a commercial zone and as part of this major activity centre. Council's traffic and transport engineer supports the provision of car parking layout and the proposed car parking on site, noting that the application proposes a different retail activity than that of the existing operation, and the on-site already generates a demand for car parking. It is also noted that there is only a minor increase to the floor level at ground floor, and there is not practical to provide further car parking on the land. The design complies with the Design and Development Overlay, the Heritage Overlay controls, and is supported by Council's urban designer, waste management officer, and a heritage advisor. For these reasons, we find the proposal to be acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Banjer. Now, tonight we have 4 people wishing to make a submission to the Chamber. 3 have indicated they are against the proposal and 1 in support. Once I have announced your name, if you'd please come forward and sit at the head of the horseshoe table. And if a submitter is not present, we will move on to the next submitter. I will remind you at this point in time there is a strict 3-minute limit, and I'd like you all to present. You start the presentation with your name and the suburb in which you live. St. John? Frowley. I might be corrected in this. It reads St. John Frowley. Did we get your name right?
Almost. It's St. John Frowley.
Thank you. All right.
And I'm a resident in Hawthorn. And I'll be quite brief, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this submission. My primary objection to the proposal is that it's not necessary. The immediate area is well serviced by existing liquor shops, of which I think there are 2 in the immediate vicinity, and having a large chain liquor dispensary doesn't seem to fit with the overall plan for the rejuvenation of the heritage area of Glenferrie Road, with restaurants and dress shops and other such things. So it's not necessary. I think the reduction in the amenity of the area around what is currently the Laurentia shop will be quite significant when you consider the trucks and movement of vehicles to support the operations of the Dan Murphys. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. I don't think it's necessary. I think it reduces the amenity of the strip, and I think it will also reduce the amenity and the safety of the surrounding area immediately on Lydiard Street and that intersection there, which is a heavy pedestrian zone. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for being so concise, Mr. Frawley. Councillors, do you have any questions of this submitter? Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in and speaking to us tonight. Can you maybe just expand a little bit on specifically what safety concerns you might have?
Well, so you've got the existing site has that small car park accessed off Lydiard Street. In that immediate vicinity, it's a high pedestrian zone. And I think with the proposal, there's going to be trucks delivering alcohol and other liquor at all different times. So those big trucks coming down Lydiard Street, accessing that very small area, just increases the risk to the pedestrians, I think, in that area.
Thank you. That addresses my question. Thank you.
Thank you. There doesn't appear to be any further questions. Thank you, Mr. Frawley.
Thank you, councillors.
I now call upon Kathleen Orr to come up and join us at the table.
Good evening, my name's Kathleen Orr and I live in Hawthorne.
Thank you.
Okay. Glenford Road's the heart of a community. We just had a community fair. You'll notice there are a whole lot of small shops there. I don't think Dan Murphy's would be, this proposed establishment would be have any part of that. There are 2 current liquor establishments that have been there for more than 10 years and they contribute to that community. When I say community, I think about a couple of things. One is I think about people, for example, who are lonely. It's one of the major health concerns of our culture, our society at the moment. And all those small shops talk to people all the time without expecting anything. I also think that the proposed liquor establishment could quite easily feed people who are becoming dependent, who are already alcohol dependent. As someone who works in the alcohol and other drugs sector, I can certainly vouch for this, whereas the current traders are small, they know their customers, and they might know when there might be a problem. Thirdly, I'd say, and this is probably fairly obvious, that there are 3 other Dan Murphys within 10 minutes of this place, one at Kew, one at Richmond, and one at Camberwell. So that's really the gist of mine.
Thank you very much. Councillors, are there any questions? There are tonight. Thank you, Ms. Orr, for your presentation. I call upon Jeremy Romanes to come forward and join us.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Good evening, everybody. Jeremy Romanes, I'm a resident of Hawthorne, actually live in Carrington Street, very close to the proposed Dan Murphy's. Thanks for allowing me to address the council. I've provided my submission to councillors, written submission, and it contains, it's pretty detailed and it contains some compelling factors in my view anyway that I think are relevant to the consideration of the submission, but for the benefit of the audience, in which is substantial behind me tonight, I make the following comments about the relevant clauses of the planning scheme and the approval guidelines under clause 6501 and the decision guidelines under 52.27. In summary, my submission argues that Endeavour's proposal should be rejected. Endeavour's proposal will at least double I'll say that again, at least double the packaged liquor retail space in the Glenferrie Road corridor, basically from the train station to MLC, including where several thousand children pass each day. The social amenity and proposed cumulative impacts, which is specifically mentioned in the clauses of the provisions that I've referred to before, are substantial and deserves much, much closer public scrutiny. You'll be aware, or you may be aware, that the Victorian Liquor Commission is currently considering a Daylesford application for Endeavour, as it happens, and they are dealing with precisely this issue, and it's worth exploring their reasoning, which hasn't been released yet, but it's coming out very soon in that particular case. Secondly, the loading bay arrangements set out in the application are inadequately developed and need to be thoroughly tested by the council. And by the way, have you tried to do a right-hand turn with a big truck into Bowen Street? I don't think so, because it's actually not possible to do. And thirdly, if the application is granted, residents should be empowered to take action against Endeavour on the council's behalf if any of the many warranties set out in the application and amended by the proposed provisions that are set out in the recommendations to council. If any of the proposed application provisions are broken, and the penalties for breaking each warranty should be substantial, in my view. So I'm happy to take questions. As I said, I've given the councillors my written submission. I think that's pretty comprehensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Moranes. Any questions, councillors? There aren't any. Thank you very much for your presentation. I now call upon Blanche Manuel to join us at the horseshoe table.
I need to press, oh no, it's on already.
No, it's on.
Hi councillors, I'm Blanche Manuel from Ratio Consultants and I represent the permit applicant, Endeavour Group. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I wanted to thank the officers for their work on the application. They undertook a really detailed review and we accept the proposed conditions that form part of this recommendation and we accept that they're enforceable. The matter that you've got before you this evening in terms of planning relates to minor demolition and works, signage, car parking and use as a licensed premises. But at a high level, what we're really considering are the details around an as-of-right use in a commercial one zone. This is a site in a major activity centre. It's commercially zoned. It's where business activity is directed by the planning scheme, and it's where a range of commercial activities and services should be provided. We appreciate that over time, these strip shopping centres can change. The feel, the character, I think some people might call it the vibe, and the offering will change as the centre evolves. And it can create concerns in the community, I get it. And we accept that as part of this proposal, the existing bike shop will cease. Wanted to make it really clear that the owner of that bike shop made this decision to lease the property, and Endeavour Group are the tenants that he's pursuing. The proposed format of the store is not a big box Dan Murphy's. The size of it and the shop itself indicates that. It's a model that provides a boutique offering with a focus on premium product, and it will be compatible with other retail offerings in the street. And this is reflected in the trading hours. It's only open till 9 p.m. It's reflected in the signage, which you'll notice is different from a typical Dan Murphy signage package. And it has a significant reduction in beer, and there's lingo for it, but pre-mixed drinks, packaged Bacardi Breezes and things like that. So it's a focus on premium spirits and wine, and that's a different model to a typical big box Dan Murphy's. And again, we understand that liquor, particularly if there's more than one outlet, that can create concern. It wasn't a mandatory requirement, but as part of this application, a cumulative impact assessment was undertaken. The proposal complied, and it was found that there'd be no negative cumulative impacts. Our client takes their role in the market really seriously. They have various charters. They've got a commitment to community and a responsible buying charter, and they represent their commitment to the responsible sale of liquor. Just on a final note, I'll touch on loading. The site takes advantage of an existing condition. There is a council car park, there is a laneway. It is typical in a strip shopping centre that access for loading will happen from a side street.
Could I get you to wrap up now?
Yeah,
Thanks,
of course.
That'd be great.
And I guess just in summary, we say that this is an entirely appropriate use for a commercial shopping strip, and we think that the officer's recommendation should be upheld.
Thank you, Ms.
Thanks,
Manuel.
councillors.
Councillors, have we any questions? None? Thank you very much for your present.
Thank you.
Snuck it in. Can you just,
Sorry.
yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your
Councillor Hollingsworth, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Look, you may or may not be able to answer this, but I'm just curious with this type of Damurthi, and from what you've presented, a little bit more boutique than standard. Do you know offhand how many deliveries would come to the store on average per week?
I thought I might get asked that question. I don't know the exact number, but in terms of the way that it's proposed, it's only going to happen Monday to Saturday up until 12 p.m, so they're restricted. There's also a condition relating to that. It doesn't happen regularly in that it's dependent on the stock required, but it's a smaller truck than an average truck I think people are envisaging. It's an 8.8 metre long truck, which isn't sort of an extraordinarily large truck. So it has been catered for the site rather than just a gigantic standard truck coming in. But it would be at least, I would say, 2 to 4 times a week, depending on obviously peak times and whatnot.
Right. And when you say the hours have been restricted, so what would be the earliest delivery time?
So the earliest delivery time is 7 a.m, but that's Monday to Saturday. And then there are conditions on the permit that relate to things like noise and obstruction of the laneway and things like that. So it's sort of regulated through conditions with other, I guess, potential things that can come from loading like noise.
Right, and I believe on the permit it's to be monitored for a period of time as well to
that's one of the
check noise
conditions.
and impact. Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. This might be a question for officers, but I'm just interested, since you mentioned the cumulative impact assessment, in whether or not, to the sort of untrained eye, we might look at the report and see that there were, 8 licensed premises within 100 meters radius of the site. How does that, but yet that it's determined that this was, I think the term was average for this kind of area or acceptable. Do you have any comment about that?
I guess what I'd say is that, so a cumulative impact assessment, there's a set of requirements that are set out as to how you go about it. So it looks at licences in general, it looks at packaged liquor versus consumption on site. In terms of social impacts, generally speaking, consumption on site is considered to have a greater impact on social behaviour and things like that because it can spill onto the street. But you look at both of them and there are thresholds, and it's also considered in the context of the zoning being commercial, so rather than it spilling into residential areas. So there's a number of criteria that need to be met, and you kind of get rated, I suppose, as to whether or not it meets the threshold. And so this does, but the other thing I mentioned before was it's not actually required for this type of application. Our clients do it to sort of ensure that they've kind of crossed their T's and dotted their I's.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Manuel. There doesn't appear to be any further questions tonight. Thank you for your presentation. I will now return to the officers for matters arising. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So to begin with, we'll just speak to the unloading and loading, as that seems to be a point of contention. SWEP pass analysis were submitted with the application, and they were also reviewed by our traffic and transport engineers, and they were found to be suitable to ensure that there'd be safe egress and ingress onto the site and laneway, and to also assure that there'd be safe unloading and loading of vehicles. Permit conditions have also been proposed to ensure that this condition would be secured. And if vehicle movements were to cause a disruption to the road network as well as the laneway, then they would be able to be, this condition could be enforced by council. Further to that matter, we would also speak to the response in terms of antisocial behaviour that can come from liquor licences. So again, this is a packaged liquor licence. It's only allowed to have liquor purchased for off-site consumption. Any matters relating to drinking on streets or drinking on premises would be referred to the Victorian Police as well as VGCCC, who regulate such antisocial issues regarding to the sale of liquor. Boroondara also has an amenity local law which prohibits drinking in public places.
Thank you, Ms. Spanjar. Councillors, do we have any questions of the officers? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Spanjar, for addressing those questions. When I look at the officer report, I see that there's several conditions from 16 to 19 to do with loading and unloading, but I can't see anything specific to do with the actual hours of when the delivery vehicles are unloading. So the presenter, Ms. Manuel, spoke about it's part of the permit conditions. Is that in a separate report?
Yes, so in terms of the loading and unloading hours, we're defaulting to Boroondara's local law in this matter, which I believe is section 49. So the permit requires that loading and unloading must be in accordance with that local law, and any variations would need to come through the planning department.
Thank you. And I actually did read the local law, but I couldn't see anything about specific times. So that's why I thought there might have been an additional clause somewhere. But is that correct what the presenter said, that the earliest delivery is at 7 a.m, is that correct?
Yes, that would be able to be beyond 7 a.m.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor Bigger.
Yes, thank you. So if I could just follow up again, in part because, you know, I think all three objectors mentioned effectively this sense of, they didn't use the word saturation, but something about that. So first, just to follow up about the cumulative impact assessment, is that an objective measure? Meaning that there are a series of steps that one can take and is actually objectively assessed?
There's a series of tests involved, yes, with the cumulative impact assessment. And they were outlined in the delegate report. It's considered for a activity centre, a major activity centre such as this one, that the introduction of an additional package liquor licence wouldn't be unreasonable in sense of additional cumulative impact.
So if I might, so the report speaks to, I think the term it uses whether or not there's a sort of a cluster. I guess that's my question. You know, is there one, and if so, I would have thought that that's not necessarily a matter for our consideration, but I'm just wanting to check, given that the report did refer to that.
Yes, so it was considered, and there was not determined to have a cluster or a cumulative impact, based on that, council didn't raise an issue or didn't have a problem with the addition of an additional bottle shop.
Just one more, if I might, unrelated this time, but just to clarify in terms of the parking, I think there was reference in the report about car parking surveys that have been done in recent years in this area, but we didn't refer to it tonight, and I just wonder if you can you know, give councillors some confidence about that area in terms of surplus parking or how that's been addressed.
So in terms of this application, parking data was submitted along with the traffic impact assessment. And as part of that, it was determined that there was surplus parking or sufficient parking in the surrounding network to accommodate the shortfall provided with this application. Beyond that, it's also anticipated that users of this site would be visiting for multi-purpose trips. So coming down, visiting the Dan Murphys, maybe going to a cafe as well, or going to pick up their groceries. And the site also provides a click and collect functionality. So for users that might be coming just for a short period, there's that sort of short accommodation used for car parking on the site too.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got a question in relation to what I understand would be that people could have cartons of wine and that they've purchased, and if it's considered appropriate normal practice, I'm assuming it must be, for people to need to move that some distance to get to their car rather than having access, nearby in a car park behind the premises?
Look, in terms of the normal practice, I guess that would be more down to the Endeavour Group. However, it's anticipated that if somebody did have a heavy load they had to carry, there would be the availability within the existing area for them to hopefully park their car. Beyond that, that is the click and collect function. Did that answer your question?
Chair, I might just add, perhaps to emphasise the last point made there. The facility is proposing a click and collect function. So that would enable someone to order ahead of time and collect at that car space and load direct into their vehicle, or potentially browse and shop within the retail premises, go and collect their car and come and collect then the goods from the click and collect spot within the premises.
On the assumption that there aren't two other people, but that is considered presumably adequate? Two spaces, because that's it, isn't it?
In this circumstance, yes, for the type of store that it is. This is not the same scale or size of store, type of store, compared to other Dan Murphys.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
We don't appear to have any further questions, so I'm now in search of a motion. Councillor Bigger.
Yes, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Park, thank you. Is anyone opposed to the motion as proposed? No. Okay. Councillor Bigger, would you care to speak to your motion?
Yes, briefly, and I'll first acknowledge that actually you, Councillor Galt, are the ward councillor, would normally be doing this, but as you're in the chair tonight, I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
I want to firstly, obviously, acknowledge the officers for their time and commitment working on achieving an outcome which I think is largely acceptable to the community and to the applicant, which can be very challenging. And certainly to thank the members of the community who have taken the time to either make a written or a verbal submission. Glenferrie Road, in this particular part of it actually, and looking at the photos tonight, it's a very unique combination of both a heritage site and an important retail center. Because of that, I think we need to ensure that both the building and the heritage are protected and is respectful of its heritage, but also that that we consider where it sits, which is basically smack in the middle of Hawthorne, Glenferrie Road, which is a major activity center. And it's zoned commercial 1. I think the hours of operation on this application are very appropriate and accepting the kind of environment of Glenferrie Road and will fit in well. And obviously, as mentioned by the officers, the changes to the building are relatively small and they're respectful of the heritage. I think I just want to mention the issue that did come up about when it comes to the issue of whether or not this shop is necessary. I think that is largely not a factor for us. The necessary question about if there are too many Dan Murphys within the area, then the economics, I think, will act in and of itself. If it doesn't do well, may not remain open. So I would say to my colleagues that while some, not all residents might have chosen a Dan Murphy's for this location, there's nothing in this application that I think is cause to refuse the planning permit. So I encourage my fellow councillors to support this. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Whilst this is not opposed tonight, Councillor Park, would you care to speak as well? No, okay. Nothing further to add? Okay. I will now put this motion. All in favour? It's unanimous. I declare this carried. We will now move right along, given the pressure of the number of submissions this evening, to the next item, 3.2, Camberwell Junction Structure and Place Plan, consideration of final plan for adoption. Tonight, the officer is Mr. David Cowan, our manager at City Futures, who will present on behalf of council. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The Camberwell Junction Structure and Place Plan presents an aspirational yet achievable plan to shape the future of Camberwell Junction. It has been informed by detailed background research, technical analysis, and 3 stages of consultation with our community. In October and December last year, Stage 3 consultation was undertaken for 6 weeks on the draft Camberwell Structure and Place Plan. Local traders, residents, and stakeholders were invited to provide their feedback on the plan through a number of workshops, drop-in sessions, street stalls, a community survey, and through the Engage Burundara website. The plan achieved very high levels of visibility, with the website receiving over 12,000 views, including around 7,000 distinct visitors. The draft plan was downloaded over 900 times, and the survey was completed at 339 respondents. The 34 detailed written submissions received during consultation are addressed in a table in attachment 3, and councillors received a number of late submissions today and over the weekend. However, the issues raised in these submissions have largely been addressed in the officer's report. These late submissions include a letter from Dr. Monique Ryan, MP, regarding the closure of Reserve Road, which was covered on page 90, I believe, of the plan, and which was circulated to councillors before this meeting for consideration. Another submission noted an inconsistency regarding the service station at 800 to 802 Burke Road. There is an inaccurate reference to the removal of the heritage overlay for that site in the response table in attachment 3. However, the plan itself, being attachment 1, is correct and does not suggest removal of the heritage overlay. The Community Engagement Outcomes Report in attachment 2 provides a summary of all the engagement results, including the 339 respondents to the community survey. And that survey showed 75% of respondents supported the draft plan. In response to all the feedback received from the community, traders and property owners, council has made a number of relatively modest changes to the plan, which are detailed in the EPDC report itself, and include improvements to some public spaces and facilities, clarifying future rezonings that will be sought as part of the planning scheme amendment process, clarifying the 6-storey height limit along Burke Road, and making building height changes to 3 specific locations. Late last year, the Victorian Government released the housing statement, including the intent to introduce planning controls by the end of 2024 for 10 activity centres that include Camberwell Junction to deliver 60,000 new homes. The Camberwell Junction Structure and Place Plan has already been completed and robustly demonstrates how both housing and employment projections can be accommodated whilst protecting Camberwell's character, investing in public spaces and improving its transport functionality. Therefore, the officer's recommendation, which is detailed on the screen before you, is that UPDC resolve to receive and note the outcomes of consultation as summarised in attachments 2 and 3, adopt the Camberwell Junction Structure and Place Plan in attachment 1, and write to the Minister for Planning to request authorisation to prepare a planning scheme amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cowan. We now move to public submissions. 17 of you in the gallery have asked to speak tonight. 15, I understand, have some objection to the plan, and 2 are in support. Once I have announced your name, please come forward and sit at the head of the horseshoe table. If someone doesn't respond, I'll move on to the next speaker. I might just remind you again, there's an awful lot of speakers tonight, and you all have an absolutely perfect right to speak. But if you find that someone before you has said exactly what you're going to say, I would encourage you maybe to pass up the opportunity, but that's absolutely, totally with you. I will remind you again that there's a limit of 3 minutes on every speaker, and if you could just start with your name and suburb. So I call first to the table Fiona Kinane.
Hello everybody, my name's Fiona. I'm from Stevens and Miller Jewellers on Burke Road. And I'm not a very good public speaker, I'm sorry. I have to say I object. I like the idea of a greener Camberwell. I think that's fantastic. However, I think this plan doesn't take a lot of things into consideration. For example, it's going to be a very congested road with 1 lane, 2 bike lanes and a tram. I actually live above my shop, so I see all the ambulances and the trucks that go down. What happens when there's an ambulance behind a removalist truck, or when Thursday morning the bins get removed? Has anybody considered that? What happens? Probably one of my other, obviously as a retailer, I'm very concerned how this is going to affect my business. People don't shop where they can't get a park. Many of my customers say, I wanted to visit you, but I'm sorry I couldn't easily get a park close to your shop. Camberwell is an older demographic. People don't ride to the shops. Generally, when you're of a particular age, you tend to drive and you want to get a park close to the shop that you want to visit. So these are something that's important to me and to my business. Many of my people that I work with have to get to work very early to get a park, that they don't have to move their car throughout their day, because we're a retailer. You can't always say, oh, I'm sorry, I'd love to continue with you as a customer, but I've got to go move my car. So I don't find this plan practical. I think it's a lovely idea again to have a greener Camberwell, but I don't think this is the way. Thank you for hearing me tonight.
If you could just remain in your seat, and I'll just check if there's any questions from the councillors. There are none. Thank you for your presentation tonight.
Thank you very much.
I'll next call Ted Don to join us at the table. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Ted from Camberwell. In submission 15, the Baptist Church stated that the kindergarten should be allowed to exceed 2 stories in maximum building height. This is on Willis Street as part of the plan, given potential future demand and government funding. The response from council was the submitter's understanding of the applicable building heights on the land as a result of an error in the way of the signature street wall has been applied. The intention is not for the street wall to be applied along each property boundary, but only the primary street frontage. Upon reconsidering the proposed building heights, it is proposed to extend the 10-storey maximum building height to the 2 properties south currently occupied by at-grade car parks, which are also owned by the church. The subject site has a civic community infrastructure focus. There is a need to support Camberwell's growing and diverse community with relevant community facilities, including education, learning, health, arts and culture. Consolidating of the lots will apply a consistent 10-storey, provides greater flexibility whilst still allowing for the height and transition to Willow Street and Denmark Hill Road. So when this plan was consulted to the public, the properties that this is referring to were at 6 levels. So changing the church land from 6 to 10 overnight, basically under the table, with the justification that the subject site is for civil and infrastructure focus to support the community, is unacceptable. The church site has a heritage overlay itself, so the church itself. So on Willow Street, it's basically going to be 1 story for the church, just like the bank building on which is the Meat and Wine Co. Then it's going to go to 10 levels, and then it's going to go back to 6, whilst interfacing with the other houses on Willow Street that are at 2 levels. So effectively, there's going to be all the residents that live on the other side of Willow Street towards the west, and then there's going to be a 10-level building right next to them. This is totally inappropriate. Just because the site has a civic community infrastructure context now and is owned by the church doesn't mean that it's not going to be sold off and turned into an office or an apartment to a developer later. So the church has a history of transacting with the developer, as it used to own some of the land that is currently occupied by the aerial apartments. So the justification that it's owned by the church and it's currently used as civil community infrastructure doesn't mean that it's always going to be under the ownership of the church and it's going to continue its use. Planning should be based on the merits of the land and not who owns the land and what they might intend to use the land for. The church may put their own apartment or office building there. Commercial 1 zoning will ultimately be whatever the owner at the time determines that it wants. This sounds like it's a decision that's based on and influenced by who currently owns the block and their likely use. If this is the case, then this matter should be referred to IBAC. Planning should be based on its merits of the land and based on its sensitive interfaces and overlooking and overshadowing and other planning matters, not the ownership. Regardless of this fact, 10 stories is way too high and interfacing with a very small street on Willow Street. Otherwise, why isn't the rest of Willow Street...
Thank you, Mr. Don. Could you please wrap up your presentation now?
So otherwise, why isn't the rest of Willow Street zoned for 10 levels as well? So it's just the church site that got the 10 levels and the rest of Willow Street got 6 levels.
Thank you, Mr. Don. We now have questions from councillors. Councillor Bigger.
Yeah, just a quick question. So what would you like to see? Would you like to see 6 floors on that side? Is that?
Yeah, so I think a more reasonable transition. So from Burke Road, obviously we've got all those office buildings and the aerial building. It's inappropriate to have everything at that 10 levels and then 2 levels on Willow Street. So it'd be nice to have, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 transition and then transition to 10 levels where all those buildings are on Burke Street. It's totally inappropriate to drive down a small, very thin street, having residents live on Willow Street in their townhouses and houses and 2-storey homes to be staring at a 10-level building in front of them. Particularly when, the church is 1 level, then 10, and then 6.
Thank you, Mr. Don. There are no further questions.
No worries.
I now call upon Liz Burton to join us.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'd just like to mention 4 points.
Oh, could you mention the suburb in which you live?
Camberwell.
Thank you.
Having read the report, I noted a tension between catering to the needs of shoppers and creating public realms which are somehow intended to stimulate vitality but may not translate into shopping or to shoppers. Second, climate change is not given adequate consideration to informing the plan. We know that this is going to impact humanity and in particular in the urban context quite significantly, and yet a proposal which is intended to be applicable for the next 40 years has no input from experts on the impact of climate change in the urban context. Currently, the state government has set up an inquiry into climate resilience, And one of its terms of reference is the adequacy of the current Victorian planning system as it relates to its adaptation to, preparation for, and mitigation of climate impacts. So the state government is investigating it, but nowhere is it informing the Camberwell Junction plan. So there's one particular aspect that I think is important, and that is orientation. This is one of the key sustainability design features, yet it is not informing the plan. Significantly, west-facing buildings ought to have and I notice that there is quite significant provision for setbacks. I do acknowledge that, and I think that has been very carefully tabulated by the officers. But I'm talking about the ground floor level on west-facing orientation, that there be provision for the planting of canopy trees at the ground level, because we know that canopy trees can reduce heat by about 9 degrees, and it could make a significant impact on the amenity of those people in the high-rise apartment buildings. Another orientation is to the north, and I'm requesting that those buildings facing north should have provision for balconies, and that be embedded in the DDOs, along with the canopy tree provision, that they go into the DDOs that are referred to. Market Square, the vision for Market Square, to revitalise it and to create a major attraction in the east of Melbourne is not going to cut it. I have recommended that there be a gallery, an edgy
can I
gallery.
get you to wrap up soon? Thank you.
In Hobart, the Mona Gallery has been a major attraction, but the kind of vision, I think we just need to look and think more boldly for Camberwell Junction, because the current plan is just not going to cut it.
Thank you. All right. Councillors, questions. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ms Burton. The provision of canopy trees, I'm just trying to understand how you would see that. Would that mean that there'd be a requirement that buildings are set further back so that there was garden space in front of them? Is that? I'm just trying to understand what you're imagining.
Yes, the current setbacks are around 3 metres in a number of cases already. But of course, one doesn't want to be counterproductive and find that in the long term, the tree roots are going to then create cracking in the buildings. So I think consideration would need to be given as to what kind of canopy tree, what root system it would have, and what the setback would need to be. And that would be requiring input from landscape architects, for example. But the setback should be in relation to that.
And are you imagining this along main roads?
Well, we already have street trees along main roads, so this wouldn't be any different to that, except the building design would need to accommodate a relevant setback.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you, Ms Burton, for your presentation. I appreciate the sentiment of the importance of climate action and sustainability. I just wanted to ask if you had a chance to go through the planning framework document, because on page 21 and 22, there is actually, I won't say a comprehensive amount of detail, but there is dialogue about objective strategies and actions, and there's quite a few references to developments of high standard, of sustainability, of accessibility, and other mentions there about the importance of design. So whilst it's probably not giving the level of detail that you would hope, it is referred to, and then we go on to page 23 about built form, design excellence. So I understand your point, but I just wanted to ask if you had the opportunity to read through all that.
Yes, I have had that opportunity, but in particular, I wanted to make specific recommendations that I know have a particular impact on amenity. And given that we're looking at increasing the population, and we're going to have them in high-rise apartments, and we know that the impact of climate change is going to constitute severe weather events, whether it be flash flooding, whether it be temperatures in the high 30s, the 40s, even 50 is predicted, then I think we need specific measures to build in mitigation, because we are looking at up to 40 years in advance. And while we might be quite comfortable here in this environment, we just have to envisage ourselves in buildings which, quite frankly, the building code is quite suboptimal.
Yes. Look, I take your point.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Ms Burton, you mentioned, obviously, tree canopies and those sorts of things. Are you aware of the increasing volume of biophilic design in more dense areas that are really using balconies and greening of buildings to shade the buildings and provide canopy?
Yes, I am. Yes, there's quite a few exemplars of that in Melbourne already.
Do you, there's a good one here in Beulah that I'm looking at in South Bank, which is under construction. Is that something that you'd accept in lieu of canopy trees? Because there's a net impact here on what can actually be built once you actually take a commercial zone like this.
In the reading that I've done, Greg Moore, for example, who's quite a noted authority on trees, refers specifically to the shade provided by canopy trees and reducing temperatures of what I've mentioned, around 9 degrees. Now, I don't think that plants along balconies is really going to have that substantial impact. And really that's what I'm looking at, because we're looking at temperatures that are quite ferocious, and buildings are often using extensive glazing.
Yep.
And so I'm trying to reduce or increase the comfort of people in those buildings.
Obviously, if with a smaller footprint for buildings, given what you're suggesting, would you consider taller buildings?
I think with appropriate setbacks that could be envisioned. On the other hand, I think in terms of the DDOs, we should be looking at higher sustainability measures, higher star ratings for those apartments. And there is a move now to having smaller apartments, but much higher energy efficiency. And I think that's what we should be aiming at.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Burton, for your very interesting presentation tonight. I call now on Leong Lim to join us. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Councillor. Thank you for the opportunity for me to... my name is Leong Lim, resident of Hawthorne East.
Thank you.
I'd like to mention, actually, I'm in support of the previous speaker on the erections of the 10 stories plan on Wheel Street. I've actually been made aware of today, so apology for a very short notice. I don't have anything, well planned as per other people. But my argument, my argument would be from the standpoint of safety, security, and due to increased traffic generation, and also loss of light and overshadowing.
Thank you.
That's
your presentation. Councillors, are there any questions of this submitter? There are none. Thank you for your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
I'll now call upon Paul Dunn to join us.
Thank you for your time, councillors. I'm Paul Dunn from Dunn's Leather Goods, with a business here since my grandfather started in 1960.
If you could just mention your suburb of residence.
From
Thank you.
Burke Road, Camberwell.
Thank you.
And I'm very concerned about the reduction in car spaces on Burke Road. We've got more mature and elderly clients who need to park close to the shops, and parking's already very difficult in Camberwell. I saw your surveying of the car spaces, and even on the 37-degree day last week when trading was quiet, there was no spaces in the car park behind Dunn's Leather Goods. There were no spaces on Burke Road either side. I've got photos to prove that if you want. And I just think 90% of the customers in Burke Road travel by car. They need car spaces, population's growing, more cars are going to become present. And there seems to be a very small amount of cyclists travelling in Burke Road. I know that's very important too, but as you've seen in the city, they've introduced all these bike lanes instead of car spaces, and they're really not being used very much. I think this is a very big concern, and if you can't park, then people will travel to other suburbs to do their shopping. We have a beautiful local strip here, and don't change it just for the sake of changing it. It's all nice to have it green, but not at the expense of car spaces. I think that's critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, there are no questions of this presenter tonight? No. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Dunn. We'll now move to Tracy Steele.
Good evening, Tracy Steele, a retailer in Burke Road, Camberwell, since 1945. 1945. Now, our ladies drive, they're mature ladies. We have ladies with lymphedema, ladies that are suffering mastectomy, overweight ladies, and a lot of maternity ladies. Our business has been obviously very successful. Now, our ladies need to pull up in the car park outside the business and enter. It takes quite a while for servicing these ladies, and quite often we have to go out and fix up the meter. Now, I cannot see why we need a bike track, which it just interferes with the ladies getting out of the car. Quite a few of them will be in wheelchairs, and my work ladies will have to assist them in and out. And Burke Road is a commercial area, and we don't want the flower pots in the front of our shops. No one can see the shops. I've seen this down at Geelong, where we also supply, and I'll go down one of the main streets there. You cannot see the shop to see what it's selling because they have these trees. Also, I'd hate to see Burke Road turn into the street down in Richmond where no one can go. I have grown up in Camberwell as a child. My forefathers are the Fordhams, the McLarens, etc., who've given their lifelong service to this community. And I hope that you will re-look at this, because Burke Road is a commercial road. It's not to be beautified with plants, etc. We've got plants already there. And then what happens to the Christmas thing when it comes? That goes as well, and my ladies trip over that with all the plant boxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions of this presenter? No, you may return to the gallery.
Just one quick one, if I may, Chair. Sorry, I jumped in at the last moment there.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies.
Thank you for coming in and speaking to us tonight. I may have missed this, but you talked about parking challenges outside the door of your shop, but I didn't really catch where the location is on Burke Road.
945 Burke Road, Camberwell. I've only just learnt of this probably 2 nights ago. I rang all day today, no one could answer the phone to me.
Sorry, just to the parking issue.
Yes.
Are you saying that there's no parking currently near your shop? There's
Yes, I
insufficient?
have parking near the shop. I tried to get a copy of the plan before I entered, but apparently it looks like I'm going to be having planter boxes out the front of the shop.
Okay, I'll leave it there because that's just a concept drawings. They're not actually locked in things. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks very much.
Good. Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Yes,
If you
thank
could
you.
just-
Sorry, one more question. I didn't catch what your business was.
It's Dickory Dock, ladies' corsetry.
Right.
The old world, we fit them, and my mother-in-law brought the mastectomy pads to Australia in 1946.
Thank you for that.
Her services in the war.
Wonderful, a much needed business. Is there no other disability access to your shop other than parking out the front?
No. And I think that's the way they like it. They don't like to be named with that. They can accommodate that, and we can. But I have asked the council before to get little tickets so we could put them on their car so they could stay longer. We got a lot of customers from the country and interstate as well. And my ladies cannot go on a tram because you cannot get off and on a tram. I found that myself now. And also they don't ride bicycles.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Councillor, just a moment. Thank you. Another question still to go. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Steele, for your presentation, all very relevant and important to us. It's certainly been a landmark shop in Burke Road. I'm curious to know a little bit more about who you couldn't get in touch with today to get a copy of the plans. You said that you rang.
Urban development.
And you weren't able to speak to anybody today?
No. The lady was very helpful in planning. She tried to put me through urban, there was nobody there. Then they sent me back to reception and she was very helpful, but she couldn't help. She said, there's nobody there to help you. And when I arrived here, the planning prints had all gone, the booklets.
Thank you, we'll follow that up.
Okay.
Okay. Well, sorry, one more question still to go. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Steele, for your presentation. I must admit, I am an admirer of your shop, but I've never been in there. And look, I just wanted to ask you, are you happy to leave your phone number with one of the officers tonight, and perhaps we can give you a call and talk about some of the issues you've mentioned?
Yes.
All right.
Most definitely.
Perhaps a governance person could come and take your phone number. Thank you.
Which one?
One of the governance officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Steele.
Thank you.
We'll now move to Patrick Brennan. If you'd join us at the table, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors. My name is Patrick Brennan. I'm one of the directors at Contour Consultants, and we represent Zig Inge, who are the owners of the Riverlea Cinema.
Could you just mention your place of residence, or suburb?
Our business is based in Carlton, our consultant business. But this is the submission is made on behalf of the owners of the Riverlea in Camberwell. Look, our client welcomes the preparation of the structure plan, as many people do, and in particular they welcome the public realm improvements that are contemplated and the various streetscape improvement works. Zig Inge have owned the Riverlea for approximately 15 years, and they certainly recognise their responsibility as custodians of this very important building and use. In talking about the Riverlea Cinema, there are two distinct parts. There's the Art Deco heritage building, and then there's the later precast concrete structure built in the early 2000s. And Zig Inge also recognises that this building and the use is a very important asset to the activity centre, both in terms of the role it plays in the mix and diversity of uses in the area, its cultural role, and of course its heritage value. And this is also recognised by the structure plan itself, which seeks to support the role of the Rivoli Cinema to activate the precinct and the nighttime economy. In response to a submission made by our client, there have been some changes made to the structure plan, including an increase to the preferred height contemplated on the very northern end of the site, which is not subject to a heritage overlay or doesn't contain any heritage fabric. And this change is certainly welcome. However, we make two further submissions. Firstly, that the preferred height is increased further, and secondly, that the same height apply to the whole of the site, and that includes the Rivoli Cinema, and I'll come to the reasons why. The reasons are twofold. There's a certain level of development required on the balance of the land to support the ongoing and further reinvestment in the Rivoli Cinema to ensure its long-term viability, to ensure it continues to play the important role in the precinct and the nighttime economy for many years to come. Secondly, the planning context also supports this. It's a relatively unconstrained site, doesn't have any direct residential interfaces, and it's very large. It's capable of accommodating significant development that could deliver new housing or employment space and sustainable forms of development. These suggested changes in no way are suggesting any demolition works or significant alterations to the Rivoli building, the significant Rivoli building. They are purely related to the balance of the site, and again, to be able to achieve a development outcome that supports that longer term investment in the Rivoli to ensure it is there for the long term. And we would respectfully ask for the opportunity to have officers engage further with our client to discuss these matters further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Addis, you have a question.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks. Was it Mr. Brennan?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I gather they're preferred heights. Can you just remind me what the listed height is and what you would prefer it be? What difference are you seeking, I think I'm asking?
Look, I think there are preferred heights within the structure plan on sites of either comparable size or that are nearby that nominate a 10 or 12 storey preferred height limit. Yes, they're preferred and as such they're variable, but something in line with that we think would be appropriate. And of course that doesn't necessarily mean that the ultimate assessment deems that, that's the development outcome, but purely about setting the expectations for the site, we think should be aligned with those other sites.
So yours isn't currently suggested to be 10 or 12?
No, it's currently suggested to be between 6 and 8. 8 would apply to the very northern end, with 6 applying to the balance of the land. Some of that is the Art Deco building, some of that is the later addition.
Thanks for clarifying.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you for your presentation. I note that the Rivoli is under the Victorian Heritage Register, the Act. Does that have internal heritage controls?
To the Art Deco building, I believe it does.
So how do you see applying a greater volume to not only the heritage facade but the heritage controls within the building on that southern portion? How does that apply? So you might be able to explain that to councillors.
Sure. Look, any redevelopment of the site that's subject to that registration requires a Heritage Victoria permission as well. So there's going to be a very detailed heritage assessment of any application involving those works. That has some regard to whatever the preferred height may be, but I can't preempt what the outcome of a Heritage Victoria permit might be, but I'd say it's very unlikely that any form of significant demolition would be permitted, and the assessment of that application is based on, I suppose, purely heritage grounds.
And would that application, maybe this is a question for officers, whether that application would come through council or would that go to another body? Maybe officers can respond to that in due course.
Yes. There doesn't appear to be any further questions. Thank you, Mr. Brennan, for your presentation. I now call upon Stuart Lindsay to join us. Thank you.
Good evening and thank you. I'm Stuart Lindsay. I'm President of School Council at Camberwell Primary School, 290 Camberwell Road, Camberwell. I reside in Camberwell. Camberwell, I understand you've had submissions or feedback from the community representing both for and against the closure of Reserve Road. We would like to present our feedback regarding that closure. As the officer mentioned, firstly at the federal level, we have the full support of the member for Kooyong, Dr. Monique Ryan, who supports the...
Can I, just a point of order, is this part of this plan? Can I just clarify?
We did actually check beforehand, and it does make reference to this street. How appropriate this is, I don't know, but really what the presenter is asking is for us to carry that recommendation further. I think it's allowable, but please don't get into too much detail. We hear what you're saying.
And I wasn't sure from the documents whether you supported or against or continuing discussions. But yeah, Dr. Monique Ryan fully supports the partial permanent closure. At the state level, the Honourable John Berger MP also supports it, and he'll be presenting a petition to Council shortly. And also the member for Hawthorn, Mr. John Pizzuto MP, also fully supports the permanent partial closure of Reserve Road. We surveyed our parents and carers last year, of about 1,000 of them, 97% said that they support the partial permanent closure of Reserve Road. Ultimately, we're here for the sake of the children, 5 to 12-year-olds who cross that road hundreds of times a week, thousands of times a week. It may be 1 in a million that a child gets hit, but in 3 or 4 years' time, that million will happen. So we want to make sure that that child is safe and has that right to safe access to their school and playground that they deserve.
Thank you. I think the questions have been stated. There's no further questions at this point in time? No. Thank you. You may return to the gallery. Simone Sparks, plural. Simon Sparks.
Good evening, councillors. I'm a very masculine Simone Sparks. My name's Simeon Sparks. Thank you for your time.
You can't naturally assume that necessarily.
I know you can't these days. Thank you for your time. My name is Simeon Sparks. I'm a small business owner in Burke Road, Camberwell, Cavalier Menswear, and I've noted that I don't think any of you men have ever been in my shop, so that's appalling.
My husband has.
You've been, yes. And I'm opposing the proposal of removing of the car spaces and putting in bike lanes up Burke Road. Like my colleagues, they're not colleagues, other retailers, I don't want Burke Road to end up looking like Bridge Road, Richmond, where nobody goes and it is bereft of soul or anything like that. We've gone through enough dramas, we know, with COVID and everything, and we don't want to be losing our customers to Doncaster Shopping Town or Chadstone. So we'd like to retain them and keep our customers there, and, you know, they need to find a car space. Okay. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in Cavalier one day, gentlemen.
If you could just retain your seat. Councillor Addis.
You don't think some of us women buy our husbands' clothes?
If I saw your funky glasses come in the shop, I'd remember you certainly, Councillor.
And now for the
Addis.
serious question.
Yes.
Are you saying that your customers can't find a park in the large car park behind
yes,
you?
they can, but then again, Burke Road, you've got someone who might want to pop in for 5 minutes. They see a car space on Burke Road and go, right, I've got to go in there and pick up my, whether it's the wedding ring or the bra or it's a suit, picking up their alterations for their husband or whatever. They can whip in, whether it's for 5 minutes, a half an hour or an hour, there's that time. And for them to then go around the back and then the circus begins, yeah, I just think it's pretty inconvenient and I don't know, probably hasn't been logically thought out that well, but okay, I'm not that smart at all that sort of stuff.
Thank you, Mr. Sparks, sir. You may return to the gallery.
Thank you very much.
I now call upon Helen Slay.
Helen Slee, Camberwell Junction Ward, Camberwell. Good evening. I have to say that I am shocked at the intensive development proposal in this document. The 8, 10 and 12-storey apartments, I'd call them towers, lining the eastern and western public car parks behind Burke Road is difficult to imagine. The 6-storey Burke Road shops all the way to the junction with token facadism in front is another imagination. I disagree with the 2018 report claiming underutilisation of car parks. I go to the eastern car park at least 3 times a week, the western car park at least twice. They are always almost full. You need to pick your times. Future demand will surely increase, not decrease. Conflating the public-owned car park data with private ones enables the claim of a surplus. Privately owned ones are out of council's control. There are 4 council junction-owned car parks earmarked as future development sites. Why would you sell them for short-term gain? They are crucial assets for the community. Maidstone Street car park is marked for a 6-storey building, Fairholme Grove 8, Harold Street 8, Butler Street 8. The one thing we can control is our council community-owned car parks. Therefore, I ask councillors to stop this future possibility by deleting all development proposed on these car parks and unequivocally enshrining them in community hands as in the public car parks they are. You have the power to do this. I also note that in this large detailed document, there is no commitment to acquire new land for public open space, yet the junction population is deliberately planned to increase exponentially. And finally, regarding the Market Plaza, if its purpose is to reinvigorate the market, I believe the quality of the stall holders and packing up early is the main problem. It has been declining for 20 years. The proposed loss of 35 car parks may further reduce shoppers. It could just end up as a food court. A better and far more appropriate option is developing the surrounds of this civic centre as a community plaza. In particular, removing some paving at the interface with Camberwell Road in front of the library, adding some canopy trees to soften what is a hot and glary gateway. The Civic Centre has the infrastructure and space to become a visitor destination with unlimited possibilities. For example, music, art, plays, festivals, plus you have a shared playground nearby.
Ms. Lee, would you mind wrapping up your presentation
I'm
fairly
nearly
shortly?
finished. In closing, I unfortunately believe that these plans tonight will decline the Camberwell Junction rather than make it thrive. I'm very sorry to have to say that, and it'll be dominated by apartment towers. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Councillors, any questions? None? Thank you. Return to the gallery. Paul Coughlin, if you'd like to join us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Paul Coughlin, and I shop at Cavalier. Always. I'm a resident of Hawthorne East and specifically in Will Street.
Thank you.
And my presentation tonight relates to the proposed changes on the east side of Will Street, specifically on page 89 of the Civic Precinct plan guidance. As was identified in October last year, the height limit opposite my residence in Will Street was at 6 stories, and subsequently has been changed to the 10-storey limit with only a 5-metre setback. And I note, in fact, that on the Civic Precinct overview objectives, that one of them is to manage sensitive residential interfaces surrounding the precinct, and I would respectfully suggest that putting a 10-storey building over the road, a very narrow road, from a standard residence is anything but sensitive. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? There are none. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Coughlin. We'll now move to Heather Coughlin.
Good evening, my name is Heather Coughlin. I live in Hawthorne East, and I haven't got much extra to say other than what my husband has just said. But one of the things that bothers me a lot is that in the October plan it's 6, and then now it all magically goes to 10 or 12. So that's a big change without consultation. Secondly, having a 10-storey building across the road from a house which we have put solar panels on, it's not useful for it to be overshadowed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions of this presenter? Councillor Bigger.
Thank you for coming tonight. I just might ask the same question I asked earlier, which is, I suppose, were you comfortable with the proposal when it was at 6 stories?
I wasn't particularly happy with 6, but acknowledging it's a commercial area, that's obviously a possibility, although when we bought the property, there were no plans for it to be increased, and we sought with a car park, and it being such demand for the play centre and the church that it would stay that way. So now to suddenly go from 6 to 10 to 12 is a bit of a shock.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There doesn't appear to be any questions. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for your time.
Karen Morrison.
Good evening, I'm Karen Morrison and I live in Hawthorne East and I'm located right on the junction in the aerial building. I thought today what I would actually start off with was I reviewed the privacy rules. I've lived in Camberwell for 38 years and I looked at the rules and it says, what are the overlooking regulation rules? That a habitable room, window, balcony, terrace, deck or patio should be located and designed to avoid direct views into the secluded private open space and habitable room windows of an existing dwelling within a horizontal distance of 9 metres. The other issue, to my knowledge, the building regs have not taken into consideration high-rise apartments and is lacking to cover unsightly rooftops from being screened off as they only cover line of sight from ground level. As I only have 3 minutes, I will state that I oppose 95% of the planned amendment as most of the addresses impacts my dwelling and I object to them. Every aspect of my view will be impacted by the changes from 6 to 8 and others to 10 and higher with a case-by-case submission. Like many in my complex, we do not feel that this would be actually good for our health and well-being. We have a 360 view of the junction and the city. Alternative to keeping the maximum to 6, to keep the look and feel of Camberwell Junction, I feel could help to sway people from being so worried about what's going on, and to keep in place current heritage overlays to avoid the destruction of iconic buildings like the Rivoli. As it appears commercial zones are open-ended, some zones are being redone, changing from residential to Z1, I think it is, commercial. I'd like to keep them as residential to avoid ruining the actual neighbourhood. As commercial, is it limited? I'm not aware of whether it is or not. Impact on the current parking to accommodate the upgrades. It's stated the car parks available are currently underused. As we've heard from other people, that is not the case. This has a lot to do with the ease of finding long-term parking. Most of it's actually occupied by privately owned people to get to the shops, and the security is lacking in some of the high-level car parks which are opposite Harold Street. I feel the interruption to daily life with so much building and rezoning, thank you, and introduction of a general residential zone to increase building zone limits will impact us terribly. Where does it end? For 697 and 699 Burke Road, which is, for the record, not part of the aerial building as listed, and in fact aerial residents are currently taking them to VCAT for the modifications that impact our residents for this address. Currently sitting at 10, and your new planning will allow them to increase to 12. I'm not fully understanding what the wording on page 280, 746 Burke Road amendment stating setbacks are not compulsory.
Thank you, Ms Morrison. If you can move towards wrapping up, that'd be great.
If all of the recommendations were to go ahead, we would be overshadowed and lose light and privacy, which is something I feel would impact a lot of people in my area. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? There are none. Thank you very much. You may return to the gallery. Joanne Fenton.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Joanne Fenton and I live in Hawthorne East in the Campbell Junction ward. I am not supportive of this report. I am shocked that council is reliant on mid-2018 very out-of-date survey data. I am very concerned that council is making its decision about the fate of our 4 car parks on such out-of-date data. This material does not take into account the continuous development and construction, including high-rise construction, that has been occurring since then and the impact this has had on car parking. For me to have success parking in our car parks, you have to be selective in your timings to ensure you actually get a car park. I find it odd that in council's current structure and place plan, it highlights a considerable future growth in the population of Boroondara, and then, in the same documentation, it is reducing parking for vehicles. If people cannot find car parks, the Burke Road traders will lose their customers. I am quite flabbergasted that council is planning to sell off our crown jewels, our community land. Council should be buying more land so as to increase the much-needed open space and car parking needs for the future of Boroondara. Moving on to Fritz Holzer Park. There are currently about 7 entrances into this precinct. There is also a wide dirt path entrance from Camberwell Road. This entrance, like the others, is not labelled. There is no signage anywhere near the park advising anyone of its existence. Page 196 highlights 2 wide entrances, one from Rose Street and the other from Camberwell Road. I see council's clarification on where this second entrance actually is. Additionally, Fritz Holzer Park needs a highly visible and signed entrance in from Riversdale Road, a major arterial road with public transport. Surely there could be some entry to the park being provided from the community garden on Riversdale Road. Frankly, I do not understand why council has not placed high-profile signage for this park decades ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No questions, councillor? Snuck in quickly. Councillor, sorry, could you just return to your seat? We do have a question. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Vinton, thank you for your presentation, and I can tell you're upset by what's proposed. I just wanted to ask you if you are aware of the state government's housing statement and the fact that they've actually identified Camberwell as one of their future activity centres. So look, I think the officers will talk more to this in detail when they do their summary, but to some extent, are you aware that
I'm very aware of that, but we do have our own public land.
Yes, but we are compelled to put forward a submission, so I just wanted to check that you're aware of that.
I'm aware of that.
Thank you.
And I thank you for the work you've done on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Fenton. I'll now call upon Shane Molyneux.
Thank you, Chair and councillors. I'll be brief, and I think most of the parties have addressed some of the concerns I wanted to raise. Sorry, Shane Molyneux, Hawthorne East, and I represent residents at Camberwell Village Development in Porter Street, or surrounded by Porter Street, 153 Camberwell Road. First of all, I commend the council for their strategic plan, and certainly, I guess a lot of the residents, given we live now in the heart of the junction, don't oppose sustainable development, so we're not here to throw hand grenades. However, when we've looked at the plan, and we haven't had a great deal of time to fully consider it, and the responses that came back, which I thank the officers for sending back last week, we haven't really had a chance to fully absorb what it all means, and we're not town planners, so it makes it a bit difficult to understand the implications. However, I appreciate a lot of the councillors and other people who've tried to assist us in the last week. The density and the mass and the bulk are probably really what our concern is. It's the area that we're in has really traditionally been a 6 to 5 storey area. And in one case, 6 stories, which is a VCAT approved decision. So the council's already invested heavily in getting to that decision. And now they're looking at saying, well, we can make it 10 or 12. So as per the other speakers, it's the balance and transition. We can see how it can work, but we're not really convinced getting an answer saying, don't worry, we'll have it right in good design and further detailed analysis and just trust us. I guess that's where the concern is as a resident. And our other major concern is traffic management. The corner of Monteith and Campbell Road is a major concern. I know it was earmarked for traffic lights. It was fully supported by the federal government, state government. That's all been withdrawn in the last couple of months or so. There are accidents there. There was one there last week. It's a very dangerous area, and just that whole area does need a good detailed review. And just to say we'll make it 30k and it'll all be okay, won't work. It's particularly when you've got laneways that people are now starting to snake through and gutter through. Porter Street itself is a very, very congested and very, very narrow street, and 2 cars can't get down there either side, and it's already causing major issues, and that's noted as a major pedestrian new traffic entrance, so that's where the concern would be there. So I guess in closing, all I'd say is we're concerned there's a detailed assessment to continue, and we'd love to be engaged in that, but the report's recommending rezoning areas before doing that detailed for certain properties, and in particular in Porter Street, one that was the subject of a VCAT decision where it was after a number of, I'm not sure the history of it, but it was, thank you, it was agreed or ruled had to be 6 only, and that still applies currently, and it's still ready for it to go. But now it's suddenly going to be rezoned to 10, and I believe from looking at some of the other submissions that developer wants it back up to 12. So there's all the concerns that people have.
Could you now wrap up, please? Thank you very much.
Yep. Yes, I was going to say that's all. That's all I have to say.
Thanks very much. There doesn't appear to be any questions from councillors, so you may return to the gallery. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll now call upon Joanne Soso.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you for this opportunity. In brief, I'm just here really to express, I guess, concerns about the park naming.
Can we just start with your name and suburb? Thanks very much.
Joanne Soso, and I live in Hawthorne East.
Thank you.
I've read this document through, and I find a couple of overlaps with naming, which has caused a bit of concern with one of the dot points in the officer's executive summary. Fritz-Holzer Reserve, Fritz-Holzer Parklands, Fritz-Holzer Park. Fritz-Holzer Park is the passive recreation park toward the west end of the expanse of open space. I have no objection to investigations on playgrounds and other facilities, but it does concern me to read, it's on page 159 of the agenda, or I think it's 106 of the officer's report, or that under the public realm actions, there is a proposed amendment to investigate the provision of new playground and recreation facilities in Fritz-Holzer Park. So I'm just wishing for clarification. Is it that this investigation for playground equipment recreation facilities is to be at that west end of the passive recreations area? Or is it that it's intended that the investigation occurs for the council-owned land on which occupies the balance or part of?
We might take that as a statement. The office can address that later. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. Is that your full presentation?
I just want to comment on that point.
Okay, thanks very much. We do have a question. Councillor Bigger.
Yep, thank you for that. Can I just clarify then that is your concern that there shouldn't be, is your view that there shouldn't be playground equipment at all in Fritz-Holzer Park? Is that your preferred place?
I'd like a definition of Fritz-Holzer Park. The local people, the community, and I've lived in this community for over 40 years and have been involved with the development of the park since 1989, actually, in the early stages when the quarry site, the tip was filled, etc. What I have, there's no objection to the facilities, but the western end is a passive recreational park. It incorporates a flood mitigation basin. It has a particular topography. Because it's a landfill site, there are issues, being monitored and investigated, and hopefully some rectifications can occur with respect to the hydrology and leachate removal, etc. Subsidence is an issue, and when the mitigation basin was formed, and there was a lot of discussion about structures, and the designers, the geotechnical people, were adamant that no structures should be built in that basin because the floodwaters surging, collecting trees, debris, could impede the flow of water and work against the mitigation. So,
Great,
yeah.
that's really helpful. Thank you very much. I'm sure officers will respond to that as well.
All right, thank you.
There are no more questions. Thank you for your presentation. Lucky last tonight, Dr. Margaret Malloch, if you'd like to come forward.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Margaret Malloch from Hawthorn East. My comments are more general, but I've been sitting here being filled with horrific visions of a London slum with 12-storey buildings with impoverished people struggling to breathe and survive. But I had to retract from that and try to be more positive. When I wrote my submission, I really was focusing on the strengths of the report And I really appreciate it and congratulate the officers very much for trying to bring together thoughtful concerns for space and place and environment and also people, although I think people need to be a bit more highly up the pecking order of what's being considered. I've had a quick look this evening at the responses by the officers to the comments that I made, which, as I stress, are very general. And I was a local councillor myself some years ago in a rural shire, and it was always the nitty-gritty that was an issue, especially when you're building bridges and trying to surface roads in a rural shire. And where was the local post box that disappeared in 1935? But the basic issues of an environment scan of the infrastructure of water, sewerage, drainage, power, parking, Burke Road as a challenge, as a major thoroughfare. And yes, there are other bodies involved that control those sorts of elements. A huge number of different organisations. There's the state government, power companies and so on. Yes, but I'll come to a recommendation towards the end. The devil is in the detail in any of these plans. And so whilst I can really thoroughly endorse the vision of trying to make this Victorian government imposed situation as positive as possible and really respect what's been done, we do have an opportunity to be really positive, to increase sustainability, as has already been mentioned, to look at solar, internet, underground power lines, traffic reduction, a blend of housing so that there is social housing, the mausoleum that's near the corner of Victoria and Burke Roads, which is advertising apartments 3 million plus, is certainly not intended to help social housing. Thank you. And so I'm really recommending that we do a little bit of an environment scan about what's been happening in other countries. That was done to an extent when we looked at environmental issues and a range of other issues in the strategic planning exercises that were done, I think back in 2017 that I took part in, and that was really positive. So what can we learn from places like Copenhagen?
Could I get you to start to wrap up now? That'd be great.
Yes, I'm wrapping up. So what I'm recommending is an environmental scan that looks at some projects overseas that have been respectful of heritage, which we always say we want to survive, and then cheerfully get rid of it or facade it. And yes, we emphasise sustainability, but to what extent?
Thank you.
And so I think there's a challenge for the council to think a bit more innovatively and creatively and hopefully be able to make some improvements.
Thank you, Dr. Malik.
Thank you.
There doesn't appear to be any questions. You may return to the gallery. Thanks very much.
Being the last, one would hope that everybody wants to think about starting to get through the rest of the meeting. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. We'll now return to the officers for matters arising.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. And firstly, I'd like to thank all the speakers for contributing their views tonight and during the community engagement process. Many of the matters raised have been addressed in the officers' report and response table in attachment 3. However, I'll respond to a few of these matters that have been raised by a few speakers, as well as some issues that have not been addressed specifically in the reports. And I guess I'll focus on the concerns around height and parking to begin with. These are often big issues with major activity centre plans such as this. So with regards to the concerns around building heights and development densities, I guess firstly it's important to note that the vast majority of the centre has no defined height limit at present. So although there may be the perception that height limits are increasing, in fact council is introducing or limiting height more than the plan allows at present. The draft plan sets out the proposed built form parameters in pages 23 to 24 of the plan and in the supporting built form report, and goes into a fair bit of explanation around the reasoning for these heights and setbacks, etc., and about balancing the need for population and employment growth with protecting the amenity. So these parameters are based on robust projections and detailed modelling to demonstrate that future demand in both employment and housing can be accommodated in the centre up to 2051. And the parameters have been specifically designed to minimise impacts on heritage places, retain fine-grained shopping, the shopping character of Burke Road, and to demonstrate that the growth can be accommodated on particularly large sites. So demonstrating that the projected growth can be accommodated in the centre is fundamental to, I guess, gaining state government approval for our plan and introducing these height limits, and I guess putting council's position to an alternative approach from the state government. And I'll note that many of the heights proposed in the plan are reasonably consistent with some of the developments already built and approved in the centre. Just touching on some of the specific references to Will Street and the 10-storey height limit proposed there. So there was in the draft plan that was consulted on last year, there was a 10-storey height limit for the church property. With submissions, the front of that property is heritage listed and there's little ability, and we certainly don't want there to be any redevelopment of those or demolition of that heritage. So the submission was raising concern about the usability of the rear of the site, which then fronts onto the laneway. In considering that submission, we felt it was reasonable to extend the extent of that 10-storey height limit another 20 metres to the laneway, so that it could create a reasonable parcel to accommodate a development, which is part of the reason for the plan, to accommodate that growth alongside heritage and character. The developments within that property will need to provide their transitions to streetscapes and neighbours, but we felt the laneway was a more appropriate location to end that extent and be consistent with the property boundaries. And I note that these properties are only less than 20 metres from an existing 12 and 14-storey buildings, and only about 100 metres from the junction itself in the centre of a major activity centre. So we feel that the height limits proposed are reasonable. I'll move on to the parking issue, which I acknowledge is a very important issue for local traders, and it's always a challenging issue to tackle in a growing major activity centre in the centre of a major fast-growing city. So council put a fair bit of time and energy and research into investigating parking matters, and sought to address that in the transport report, so we could be, I guess, clear to the community and traders about the basis for the decisions. It also needs to be considered alongside the fact that we do have to plan for this growth, and that there'll be an extra 2,500 extra residents and potentially 4,000 employees in the centre. They'll be customers too, so it does support increased customer base for the businesses in the area, but as to attract and make this a great centre for them to live and work, we need to create public space and greenery as well. So with these plans, it's all about achieving that balance. So when we're looking at the parking issues, they're intertwined with the provision of the accommodating growth and providing the public space. Our consideration of the balance between parking and public space was informed by a parking survey in 2022, which found that Camberwell had a very healthy supply of over 3,200 public accessible parking spaces, and during peak times, there was only 60% occupancy of those spaces. So that meant that well over 1,000 parks were available even at peak times. Now the reports and the investigations acknowledge that at the most central locations, they fill up the most and will reach peak. And it's the fringe locations that do not reach peak, and the basement or the different levels of parking. So key actions in the plan look at introducing things such as electronic signage, etc., to improve the knowledge and awareness of where those parks are so that people can access them. And that offsets any impact from the conversion of some of those spaces to open space or green space or landscaping. Overall, the public space projects in the plan use less than 5% of the total parking in the precinct, and that's across the full lifetime of the plan to 2051, so it's certainly not going to happen in the short term. So that would still leave, at current sort of estimates, 35% of space available, so over 1,000 car parks. As these centres evolve, the supply of parking will actually increase quite a lot, but it will transition as development occurs, and there'll be more basement parking, more private parking provided as part of those employment developments, particularly. So that would continue to be public accessible. So it is a very complex issue, and I understand the concerns around that. When it comes to the streetscape itself, there's a concept in the plan that shows how the centre can be improved, the street can be improved. Some of that will be through state-delivered tram stop upgrades, which will likely happen at some point anyway. The concept tries to show how we can achieve an attractive streetscape that will attract shoppers and business and investment. However, it is just a concept, and as we work through that, if the plan's adopted and we work through that project, we'll do further consultation with business and traders to get the balance and the location of those spaces and that design correct. Move on to there was a bit of discussion from one of the presenters around climate change and sustainable design. Sustainable design is covered, the key principles within the plan itself, and the plan also, as mentioned before, looks to provide new trees and green spaces in the centre, so it does help deal with heat load and the amenity needs of all the future people living and working in the precinct. It also seeks to improve, I guess, the use of public transport and cycling, because in the middle of a centre like Camberwell, the road space is, I guess, a fixed element. We do need to accommodate for growth. We can't create more road space, so in order for the centre to be successful and grow, it needs to allow for more efficient forms of movement, and that will come through public transport and cycling use. That's just, I guess, a factual reality of how the centre needs to grow. Moving on to Smitta around the Rivoli. The Rivoli is obviously a very prominent state heritage listed building. It's also, I guess, culturally significant in the centre, and it is part of a character, I guess, a low-rise character streetscape down Burke Road and around the junction intersection. So we felt retaining the 6-storey building height across that site was appropriate. There was reference to Fritz Holzer Park and the playground to be investigated. I guess to allay the concerns of the speaker, the intent is that any playground would be looked at in the eastern end where there's more active uses, not the passive area. We are aware of the flood issues which are common in parkland. It was, I guess, a general description for the area. There's no specific location proposed yet. It's to be investigated further. I think they're the main issues. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, just perhaps there's just a couple of small items just to add to the elements raised by Mr. Cowan, and perhaps one of those is in relation to environment and ESD requirements and expectations. And I think I've raised this point previously. Whilst the structure and place plan clearly sets some expectations and direction in regard to improved sustainability and design outcomes for future buildings, it doesn't go into the detail of our expectations around ESD. That is a matter that this council has taken a very strong position on in regard to all future buildings in the municipality, not just in a location like Camberwell. And so what we do for a plan like this is not go into that level of detail in each individual plan, but rather deal with that at an overall level in the planning scheme. And so we have a strong stance where we have joined with other councils in advocating for changes to the planning scheme to apply ESD outcomes for all buildings. We actually currently undertake ESD assessments for larger mixed-use developments in all locations in the municipality now. In terms of the heritage matters in relation to the Rivoli, I think there was some questions or comments around what would happen with permit approvals for a building like the Rivoli that has Heritage Victoria approval. And it gets a little bit complex in redevelopment applications of this nature where there is a Heritage Victoria permit approval, but the heritage elements, if they need to be considered by Heritage Victoria, and so those heritage elements, once they've been considered by Heritage Victoria, would not be able to be considered by council. However, council would still need to consider all other elements of the redevelopment on the site, if there was a redevelopment on the site. So all the other usual planning scheme triggers would bring in relevant local planning scheme considerations. And perhaps just touching on what happens from here around built form and design outcome controls in the planning scheme. A planning scheme amendment would need to be prepared and authorisation sought from the Minister for Planning. And once authorisation is obtained, there would be a complete exhibition process of those elements that are proposed within the planning controls around built form, heights and setbacks, and obviously that involves submission processes, potentially independent planning panels and further steps where council gets to consider those matters further.
Thank you, Mr. Cowan. Thank you, Mr. Walker. We have some questions, but I might start with Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Walker's broadly actually addressed these, but there were a couple of concerns raised tonight that regarding specific things that I might just seek officer clarification on. Can you confirm, please, that concerns like overshadowing, impact on views, how they affect applications under the planning permit? And if I may, there was another presenter who remarked regarding out-of-date data, if officers could just comment on that, please. And I'd also like to foreshadow where perhaps when questions are exhausted, I'd like to seek a short adjournment, please. Thank you.
We'll return to the order. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. And look, I also want to thank Mr. Cowan. And,
Sorry, we might respond to those questions.
I was wondering about that. Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Councillor Gillies touched on a couple of points there. Overshadowing is and views are dealt with in the develop of the plan. So as we were developing the heights and setbacks and the parameters for the built form or the envelope that's allowable under the plan, we certainly considered, we looked at the shadow cast by that built form and ensured that it was still, particularly key public spaces, still had reasonable daylight access, etc. At the development application stage, then there's considerations around and overshadowing and views that are built into that process as well that are in addition to what's in the plan. The out-of-date reference, I think, was to do to the parking study. I thought it was mentioned 2008. I don't understand what that reference was from because our latest parking study is from 2022.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Gillies? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Chair, and yeah, I just wanted to say, Mr. Cohen and Mr. Walker, thank you for your responses. You've covered most of my questions, but just for the benefit of the gallery, can you please just elaborate what ESD stands for, NCC, which is soon to be rolled out, and NATHERS with the 7-star plus rating, just to give the community a little bit of an understanding of what the planning framework will entail. Thank you.
ESD generally refers to environmentally sustainable development. It can also refer to environmentally sustainable design. The other tools are, I guess, Green Star rating tools or rating tools in the design and development to demonstrate that they're achieving a high standard of sustainability.
Councillor Park.
Thank you. I think Mr. Cowan referred to an initial loss of parking by way of a percentage. I didn't quite catch that percentage.
It was less than 5%, was my reference.
And then went on to say that there'd be an increase in parking by way of private development. That's correct?
Yes. Would you like me to clarify?
No, I just wanted to add, I just wanted to confirm that that was indeed what you'd said, because my recollection, and I can't point to specific instances offhand, but in the period that I've been here, my recollection is that typically we give concessions in terms of parking to development applications in this area. And I'm curious, against the statement that you've made tonight, how that comes to happen, because obviously the longer council gives concessions, the less likely that is to materialise.
Yes, that's true that with developments in a major activity centre, there's a higher likelihood of some relaxation to the standard parking rates, but there would still be parking required, particularly of employment developments such as retail developments where there's and residential developments, but the employment-related developments are the ones that would provide the publicly accessible additional parking. But that may not be, depending on the merits of that particular development proposal, that may not be to the full rate required in the plan at present.
So it's a bit of an unknown. My final question is, are there any particular time constraints in terms of us adopting the plan, and perhaps as an addendum to that? So, for example, if there was a 3-month delay or thereabouts, would that what would be the ramifications, if any?
The main, I guess, time pressure, for want of a better phrase, that we have is the state's, I guess, timeline that they've proposed to introduce controls by the end of 2024. They have said that they'll start engagement in March, start consulting. So I guess one of our key objectives with this plan is to formally put forward Council's position on what should happen in Camberwell, not just about accommodating housing, which is their driver, but also about the employment function, the public realm, the other important things at the centre. So that's probably our main time driver.
Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the officers. I've got 2 questions that sort of go together. Given the state government's requirement for us to demonstrate increased density, greater population, so the first question is, what's likely to happen if we don't present a model that demonstrates that? And the second question related to that is, can officers think of another way to accommodate more people other than increasing the height of buildings?
Through you, Chair. Thanks for that question, Councillor Addis. I guess the first one, obviously I'd be speculating a little bit, but they have said they will introduce their own controls. They'll be doing those controls for 10 major activity centres across Melbourne within 12 months. So I would imagine it would be a relatively coarse approach to introducing greater density. In terms of what council could do, or another approach that would not involve heights proposed in the plan, other alternatives could be to spread out further into surrounding streets. There is, I guess, a range of options. We feel this is the best balance to accommodate growth in a way that also contributes to the vibrancy and the economic performance of the centre, whilst protecting the surrounding character.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question. This area is largely surrounded by heritage overlay controls, so I take your point, but to what degree would it, and again this is speculation, but to what degree would that be likely to be possible within this fairly small area?
Sorry, do you mean to expand beyond the plan boundaries?
I'm sorry, yes, to absorb it in other, yes, I understand what you're saying about we could increase density in other areas, but the degree to which that might be possible given the extent of heritage overlays.
It is more challenging, yes. It's certainly significant impacts on either heritage or character.
Thank you. The list has dropped off the screen, but from memory, Councillor Watson. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. And my question follows on from the questions posed by Councillor Addis, and again centring on the proposal that the state government is going to establish an activity centre, and we are one of 10, and requires that planning be done for an additional 60,000 dwellings. So with the proposal in front of us tonight and the community, how many extra dwellings does this plan accommodate?
The plan accommodates 1,200 additional dwellings for approximately 2,500 residents and approximately 60,000 square metres of employment floor space for 4,000 to accommodate around 4,000 jobs. Those numbers came through, I guess, independent expert demographic and economic analysis that we did at the start of the process, so we could have, I guess, independent expert understanding of what need there would be or demand from the market and population by 2051, and that provides a fundamental basis for us then looking at the development parameters and the built form controls for the centre to have confidence that we can accommodate that.
Thank you. Follow-up question to that. Well, given that, just some very rough mathematics, 60,000 extra dwellings divided by 10 activity centres, it means that it's a reasonable average assumption that our plan will need to accommodate 6,000, and we're accommodating 1,200. So my question is, based on, you have come up with a proposal that envisages certain increases in height limits, and from the question asked by Councillor Addis, there are some constraints to increasing the footprint of the activity centre due to the fact that we are in a heritage area. I know this is a challenging question, but I'll ask it anyway. What impact on the character of the centre will providing those extra dwellings up to that 6,000 look like? Would you imagine that it will substantially change the mid-rise character of Camberwell precinct?
Through you, Chair. That is a challenging question to answer. I am generally familiar with the other 9 centres. It is hard to estimate how much of that 60,000 the state would consider that Camberwell should accommodate, and I suspect that they don't know that yet either, and they're going to try and figure that out quite quickly. If in the the hypothetical situation, they propose to accommodate 6,000 in Camberwell, yes, it would have a substantial impact on the existing character of Camberwell, and they may need to look at expanding the centre, but that's, I guess, speculation.
And that's a very good answer for a very difficult question. Thank you very much.
Councillor Thompson, your light's out. Oh, it's on.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I won't go over the questions that have already been asked because I think they've answered a lot of my questions. But one follow-up from Councillor Watson through you to the Director. Should we not put in a submission? Are we disadvantaging our community?
Sorry, through you, Chair, I missed that question.
Oh, I thought you might
repeating?
have. You were busy chatting away.
Sorry, Chair, we were just discussing some important elements here.
That's okay.
Plan.
I'll ask that question again. So, should Council not provide a submission, will we be disadvantaging our community if we leave it to the state?
Through yourself, Chair, and I think this is a point that we've made on a number of occasions, that we have put in significant work into this plan over 2 years to reach the position that we have. In the context of the state government announcement around their housing strategy and what they intend to do for the 10 activity centres, we believe and are of the firm view that it is critical that this council consider this plan, endorse this plan and take a strong position of advocacy to the state, and obviously take a planning scheme amendment that will put in planning scheme controls that are suitable for Camberwell, that's developed and approved by this council with input from this community. We think it is a significant disadvantage to this community and a significant risk if an appropriate plan is not endorsed and put forward by this council.
We seem now to have exhausted questions. We'll now move to, I'd like to seek a motion from the table, from the...
I think there was a foreshadowing of a brief adjournment. Is that?
You'd like to move that now?
Please, Chair, yes.
I thought we might have covered the adjournment into the questions, but we haven't.
Largely, we have. It'll be a very short adjournment, thanks.
Fantastic. Have we got a seconder for that? Councillor Addis. All those in favour? We shall adjourn, thank you. Okay. I'd like to have a motion to resume the meeting. Who was first? Oh, Councillor Sinfield.
So moved.
Seconded? Councillor Addis.
Seconded, yep.
All those in favour? We resume the meeting. I'm in search of a motion. Councillor Gillies, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to propose a motion which will shortly appear magically on the screen. There we go. Thank you. I have a slight amendment to the officer's recommendation that was printed and previously circulated. It's highlighted in red. Give people just a moment to read that for me.
And then I'll be... That's right. So I shall be in search of a seconder when you've had a chance to read this.
You happy to second? Yep.
Councillor Watson, have you had enough time to read it?
Happy to second.
Fantastic. Is there anyone opposed to the motion as it now appears on the screen? No? Fantastic. Councillor Gillies, would you like to speak to your amended motion? Thank you.
I would briefly. Thank you, Chair. Now, the Camberwell Junction Structure and Place Plan is an extensive, thorough project for which I acknowledge and thank the many officers and the community members who've been involved. I'm not going to reiterate all the officers' responses, but I will say it's an ambitious but achievable plan with 6 key strategic frameworks. And I'm going to focus on the positives here. And then I'll round back to why that amendment is there. So I offer a brief summary on those 6 key strategic frameworks. 1, the economy. Camberwell Junction is Burundara's largest retail and employment centre. Therefore, we need to accommodate both residential and commercial spaces. Providing overall quality and amenity helps in attracting new retail businesses and investment. 2, sustainable living. This reaches into transport options, residential amenity, and a wide range of facilities needed for people living, growing, working, and ageing in the area. As a strategic plan, it cannot address all the complex infrastructure matters, but does set a well-researched framework for negotiations with relevant authorities. 3, built form. This is obviously the biggie, as we've heard tonight. The plan lays out high-level guidance regarding building heights, setbacks and interfaces based on modelling, and strives to achieve a right balance between population growth and retaining the character and heritage that we know are important to our community. Now, tonight we've heard some site-specific queries, and I understand that heights can cause concern for some. I also note that this is a high-level strategic framework and development applications still need to undergo assessments as required through their planning permit process. 4th key, public realm improvements. While the plan is precinct-wide, there are a number of smaller projects on council land that can be activated soon and will deliver excellent public benefits. And I do note the Market Plaza will be the first of them. 5th, access and moving around. There are improvements outlined, some of which are within Council's control and others that Council will work with authorities to deliver. The state government has identified Camberwell Junction as an activity centre, heavily based on the existing transport options available, so one would hope for positive engagement with those negotiations. Now, the 6th key is community wellbeing, and we see there the importance of more than just accommodation. It's community life, livability, health and welfare facilities, access and social connection. I think it's important to note this is not a standalone plan. It does not represent all the rules and compliances and regulations required. It interacts and intersects with numerous other policies and regulations. I'll just remark on the amendment, thanks, Chair. We heard tonight that some of the imagery and perhaps some of the terminology used in the draft plan has caused some perceptions of concern, such as trees, path widening. These things are actually subject to further consultation within design review, but to maybe just make some minor amendments to alleviate some of those concerns, I'm asking for permission for the Director to amend those. So the plan's been through an extensive process over the last 2 years. It's been guided by an advisory committee. It's been out to community consultation, online survey, letter drops, posters, postcards. As far as is possible and within Council's authority, the suggested amendments have been included. It's built on solid researched evidence and has been subject to scrutiny via workshops, meetings with special interest groups, traders, business networks, internal and external expertise long before it arrived in this state before us tonight. So just to wrap up, to Councillor Thompson's question, and I thank him for that, addressed by Mr. Walker, I will close my remarks by reminding my colleagues of the importance of this plan in providing a robust, comprehensive position at this time, without which Council risks losing planning control of the Camberwell Junction area to the controls of the state government. So I commend the motion to my colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gillies. Councillor, I pound out this is unopposed, but Councillor Watson, do you wish to speak tonight?
Yes, I will, and also foreshadow, Chair, that given the significance of the Camberwell structure plan, there may be others who would like to speak as well. Councillor Gillies talked about this plan being 2 years in the making, and I'd also like to thank the officers and the team effort that's gone into creating a well-founded, well-researched, modest, but yet ambitious plan for Camberwell Junction. In the realm of probabilities, the nominating of Camberwell Junction as an activity centre will also result in the loss of Burundara Council as a responsible authority. That has been already foreshadowed. So this document takes on a new level of importance because it is the voice of our community. And this is the most important advocacy work that we will do in Camberwell since the Podgornick disaster tried to develop Camberwell Junction. And sadly, we don't have Barry Humphries to come and get involved and help us to be heard in the public realm and for the government to understand that the character of Camberwell Junction is very, very important to our community. And Box Hill's not far down the road. And if you want to look at, if you want to apply the constraints and add up the numbers and figure out what accommodating 6,000 extra dwellings will look like, it's going to look like needles in the sky. So I encourage my fellow councillors to support this plan and for the community to get behind us so that we can preserve a treasure, a state treasure, which is Camberwell Junction with its unique and historic character. I commend the motion to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Now, there was a suggestion that we have other councillors speak. I accept that, but I would ask to, given the length that this is run for, to keep it relatively brief, if you wouldn't mind. Going first to Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair, and I will be brief. I think I just wanted to note the courage of officers and the ward councillor, Councillor Gillies, in putting forward something that they understand the community possibly won't embrace, but they're doing this because this is a great deal better than what we could end up with, and hopefully this does give council some control to protect this area that we've heard people love, and we totally agree with that. But I truly believe that this is very much in the best interests of the community. So just an acknowledgement of the need to make tough decisions sometime. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Addis. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I echo Councillor Addis's comments with regards to the officer's report and also the position that Councillor Gillies, as the ward councillor, is taking. Wholeheartedly support this. I think just touching on this, this is not necessarily just a strategic document that accounts for dwelling growth. It goes well beyond that. The reason why we've got this here is multifaceted. One, it protects our heritage suburbs. We've got to provide growth in certain corridors. This is the appropriate area for that to occur, not through our suburbs where our heritage overlays are. So first and foremost, it might be uncomfortable to put these sorts of plans in front of people, but this is protecting a broader sect. The other thing that it does is, and we haven't really touched on this, and I'll acknowledge our officers for bringing forward, this is not just a strategic plan, it's a place plan. So it's about livability of this area. That's one area that the state government won't focus on because they are driven by a housing outcome, which is a unit outcome. It doesn't have all of the other aspects that are reflected in this report. So the two dovetail into each other. The strategic plan references the place plan and the place plan references the strategic plan. This is a plan which will get adopted tonight, and it is one that we need to defend because this is by far the best outcome for this area for the many generations to come in Burundara. So I wholeheartedly support the mover.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Sinfield.
Thank you, Chair. While this plan may not be perfect, let's not allow perfect to get in the way of good. City planning, as we know it, is a complex mix of art and science, and it's informed by critical community engagement, and I thank the community for coming to us tonight in relation to this. If the government proceeds as reported, these pillars of our planning system may be lost. The qualities which have made our cities the places we choose to live and work and play and bring up our families may be lost to their new approach. Engaging with the local community is a core principle of the Victorian planning system, one that we hold dearly here in Boroondara, and community participation in that planning system certainly ensures that all new developments, infrastructure and urban change is informed by local character and context and community perspectives that we've heard tonight. These objectives are enshrined in the Planning and Environment Act, and Boroondara Council considers the local community involvement in the planning process essential. The Premier's statement last September suggesting that Council's role in significant planning matters should be reduced is not only a slap in the face to our community, but it can lead Victoria down a very dangerous path, one that we are quite fearful of with the new strategy the state government has released. It's in the best interests of developers and not our community. We appreciate the feedback, particularly from traders, and it's not lost on us tonight. I, for one, support the retention of the on-street parking in Burke Road, but there is an element of urgency to ratify this document tonight, and it will give us great leverage when at the table with the state government. And I think it's unlikely that this plan will come to fruition. It's my fear that the state government's plan will be much, much worse for our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Sinfield. I will now return to the ward councillor, Councillor Gillies, to see if there's anything that needs to be added.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's nothing further to add, just to commend the motion to my colleagues.
Fantastic. I will now put the motion as it appears in the amended motion as it appears on the screen before you. All of those in favour? I'm seeing no one against, so I declare this motion carried. Thank you. We're right to move on to the next item in the agenda. 3.3, 508 to 510 Burke Road, Camberwell. Sorry, I should let the officers take their seats. It's been a long night. Okay, 3.3, 508 to 510 Burke Road, Camberwell, proposed heritage overlay, outcomes of preliminary consultation. Tonight, Emil Dixon, a Senior Strategic Planner Heritage, will present the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to inform the Urban Planning Delegated Committee of the outcomes of preliminary consultation on the draft heritage citation for 508 to 510 Burke Road, Camberwell. In April 2023, new information was provided to council officers identifying Christopher Cowper as the building's architect. In May 2023, GML Heritage prepared the assessment and citation which recommended the inclusion of 508-510 Burke Road in the heritage overlay as an individually significant place. Preliminary consultation on the draft heritage citation ran from the 22nd of November 2023 until the 2nd of February 2024. Council received a total of 31 supporting submissions and no submission in opposition. Matters raised in the feedback are addressed in the UPDC report and no changes are recommended to the draft heritage citation. Council officers therefore recommend that the UPDC resolve to adopt the heritage citation for 508 to 510 Burke Road, Camberwell, as provided at Attachment 1, and to write to the Minister for Planning to request authorisation to prepare and exhibit an amendment to the Boroondara planning scheme to include the property in the heritage overlay on a permanent basis. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. We have two presenters wishing to present tonight. Refreshingly, both support the proposal. And I know many know the rules, but once again I'll say, once I call your name, please come forward to the table, and if you're not there, we'll move on to the next speaker. I will then again remind you that there's only 3 minutes to speak and you need to start with your name and suburb. So if we can commence by calling Christina Brannigan to join us at the table. Thank you. Doesn't look like Christina Brannigan.
I'm
If we
sorry.
could definitely start with your name and address.
I'm Jane Oldham, but I am standing in for Christina Brannigan, and we both live in Camberwell. Could I have a slide, please? Thank you. Christina is supporting the position tonight and would like to thank officers and councillors who have supported the work assessing the house. She supports the officers' recommendations due to the architectural and historical significance of the design of this house and the importance of its architect, Christopher Cowper. Cowper was an architect who strongly influenced Boroondara's character from the 1890s to the late 1920s. He was a resident of Boroondara, residing in Linda Crescent, Hawthorn, and later in Studley Park Road, Kew. He was renowned for the Queen Anne houses he built in Melbourne's middle ring suburbs of Brighton, Kew, Hawthorn, Camberwell and Canterbury. He is recognised by experts as one of Victoria's foremost architects of the Federation Queen Anne style. He is best known for his extensive residential development in Queen Anne homes in the garden suburb environments of Grace Park, Hawthorn, where he designed 33 houses. In his later residential work, however, as we see at 508 Burke Road, Cowper favoured the attic bungalow. Examples of his extensive work include an attic villa at 71 Broadway, Camberwell, that was 1915, several in Toorak, and innovative shops and flats in St Kilda. The Heritage Report states that one of the reasons Barraboll at 508 is important to conserve is because the house illustrates the later part of Cowper's oeuvre and provides the missing link in his work between the late Federation-era attic bungalows and full-fledged interwar bungalows of the late 1920s by his practice. In fact, it states the following when discussing 508. In considering Cowper's oeuvre within the city of Boroondara, there is nothing even closely comparable to it. The study confirms that it's a great piece of architecture, constructed and designed by craftsmen. It also records a time in Camberwell when most GPs worked from home and deserves to be conserved as the work of our foremost local and Victorian architects. The house meets criteria A, D and H, the later being a criterion we are rarely able to use. It's a special place and sadly for us in Camberwell, one of the few surviving original homes of the Sunnyside estate. Council tried to protect a number of these houses in this iconic estate during the gap studies, but unfortunately it was not to be, and now many of them have been demolished, most replaced by huge single houses on large lots, boundary to boundary, not designed by architects nor built by craftspeople, but rather with off-the-shelf designs that have denuded the streets and gardens.
Can I ask you to move towards wrapping up? Thanks very much.
Yes. Typically, they provide no community benefit in terms of increased housing or more affordable homes and are destroying the garden suburb this part of Camberwell once was. Please support the officer recommendations before we lose this important remaining rare example. Thank you.
Councillors, any questions? There don't appear to be any. You can return to the gallery. Thanks very much. I now call upon Paula Donoghue to join us.
Good evening, my name is Paula Donoghue. I live in Camberwell.
My husband and I, were the 4th owners of Barrabool at 508 Burke Road. We were the ones that did the renovations. We were very careful to make sure that the square downpipes were included and the gooseneck curves and everything. It is over 100 years old. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of demolition that did involve the original house, despite what the current owner says. I really have very little to add. Everything is written in here. When we bought the house, it was considered part of the Sunnyside estate. It was had a single dwelling covenant. It was built on 2 blocks, which meant the building actually is across the 2 blocks, which meant if the fellow that bought it, who wants to develop it, would have to demolish the house to put up his McMansions. Christopher Cowper is an architect of significance, and we think his work should be preserved. A house further down Currajong Avenue was a Christopher Cowper design. It has been demolished and been replaced by a McMansion. I still have the original specifications in my possession if anyone would like to see them. And I think that's about all I need to say.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions tonight, so thank you very much for your presentation. If you could return to the gallery.
Thank you.
Officers, do you want to pick up any of those points?
Thank you, Chair. There don't seem to be any matters that have been raised that we can address here, but thank you to both presenters who came in and addressed the UPDC.
Thank you. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Must be late. I will then move to seeking a motion from the chamber.
Is it in your ward? Can I just clarify which ward this is in?
It's Councillor Franco's ward.
Oh, it is, so I'm not stepping on toes. You go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've actually received an email from the ward councillor asking me to speak on his behalf. So if I may, I would like to support the officer's recommendation on behalf of Councillor Franco.
Thank you. I'm now seeking a seconder to that motion. Councillor Gillies, if you happen to second that.
Assuming the motion is the officer's recommendation on the screen, then yes.
That's what Councillor Hollingsworth said.
Excellent,
thank you.
thank you.
All right. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? There's not. Councillor Hollingsworth, would you now like to speak on behalf of Councillor Franco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And look, regardless of whether Councillor Franco had put the request in or not, I would certainly be supporting the officer's recommendation. If I may just recite some words that Councillor Franco would like me to say on his behalf. He apologises that he cannot be here this evening due to ill health. He just wanted to note that back in April 2023, the former owners of the property, the late Simon Donoghue and his wife Paula, who presented this evening, asked to meet with him to discuss the heritage of this, or the heritage significance of this property. At that time, there was a great degree of information provided. Simon also provided Councillor Franco with the original building specifications that Ms Donoghue referred to earlier. The house was at 508 to 510 Burke Road in Camberwell. At that time was not subject to heritage overlay. It had not been identified as a place of heritage significance in previous heritage investigations. The most recent investigation at that time deemed that there was lack of information to support it being included on the heritage overlay. At that time, insufficient evidence was available. Councillor Franco then did his own research investigation and approached heritage advocates and spoke to them about whether or not they would be interested in undertaking any further investigation. Through that process, and with the assistance of presenters here tonight as representatives of the Burundara Heritage Gap advocacy, additional information was unearthed, a community nomination was put forward. It was obviously, as discussed, the original architect, renowned for his incredible work within Burundara, was identified as the architect, Mr. Christopher Bowen. With the support of the evidence brought forward through the archival research, this has now led to the submission or the motion put before us this evening to proceed further to recognise this significant property for the heritage relevance that it actually has. So finally, Councillor Franco is saying that he would like to thank the officers for preparing this report in a timely manner. This property has been under threat of demolition and it is very important that this matter be resolved promptly. And again, he thanks the officers for bringing this to the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Gillies, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief word to thank the members of the community who followed our community nomination process and those who assisted them in the research, particularly the Donoghue family. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hollingsworth, there's nothing more to add, or do you?
I just can commend the motion to my councillor colleagues. Thank you.
Fantastic. I shall now put the motion as printed. All those in favour? Doesn't appear to be anyone opposed. I declare the motion carried. Thank you very much. Just moving to item 4 on the agenda tonight, general business. Councillors, are there any matters of general business? No. Any items of urgent business? No. Confidential business? No. I shall now move to close the meeting. Before I close the meeting, I wish to thank all of you who have joined us this evening. I declare the Urban Planning Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you.